The morning air bit at the skin, a harsh reminder that winter had truly arrived in the city. The sidewalk pulsed with hurried feet and the distant hum of traffic, but none of it seemed to touch Jonathan Blake. He walked with a singular purpose, his arms wrapped protectively around his daughter Lily. At 10 years old, she was heartbreakingly light, her legs limp, unmoving, her small face buried in his coat. Another therapy session had ended in tears and silence. The doctor's hopeful tones had long since dulled into polite resignation. Jonathan's own hope was threadbare, like an overworn coat he couldn't bring himself to throw away. As he crossed 46th and Lexington, his voice cracked in a low murmur, not meant for anyone but the cold wind and the weight he carried. "There's nothing left to try." His words vanished into the morning bustle, swallowed by the honks and footsteps. And yet, somehow, someone heard. Out of the crowd stepped a boy. Barefoot on the icy pavement, no older than 13. His clothes were threadbare, patched and stained. A cracked, mismatched violin hung from a frayed strap around his shoulder, and his fingers were red from the cold. But his eyes, dark, luminous, unwavering, locked onto Jonathan and Lily with a calm that cut through the noise. He didn't ask for money. He didn't beg. He simply stepped in front of the millionaire, holding up a hand not in demand, but in quiet plea. "Sir," the boy said, his voice firm but soft, "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan stopped as if struck. For a moment, the world around him blurred. The honking horns, the gusts of wind, the scuffle of boots on pavement, all fell away. It was just him, his daughter, and this strange child who had said something so impossible, so absurd, that it forced him to freeze in place. His eyes narrowed. First in confusion. Then disbelief. And finally, in something he hadn't felt in a long time, curiosity. He looked the boy over, taking in the swollen knuckles, the cracked lips, the quiet steadiness in his gaze. This wasn't a scammer or a street performer trying to gilt money from a rich man. He wasn't selling a miracle. He was offering something else. Something unspoken. Lily stirred slightly in his arms, perhaps sensing the shift in her father's posture. Her eyes fluttered open, drowsy but aware. She looked at the boy. And then, faintly, she smiled. Jonathan's lips parted, but no words came out. He didn't know what he was supposed to say. 1,000 thoughts clashed in his mind. Who is this child? What does he know? How dare he? But underneath it all was a flicker, a whisper of something he had nearly forgotten. What if? Who are you? He asked, his voice rough, uneven. The boy tilted his head and touched the violin gently, reverently. Just someone who's seen what music can do, he replied. I don't want your money. I only want 5 minutes. For her. Jonathan looked down at Lily. Her eyes met his, and she gave the tiniest of nods. She wasn't afraid. He didn't know how, or why, but somehow, she trusted him. The man who had built empires by never taking chances with the irrational, who had made every decision based on data, suddenly found himself listening to a barefoot stranger on the sidewalk. The boy stepped back, motioning toward a nearby bench. Please, sir. Just listen. And for the first time in years, Jonathan did something unexpected. He said, okay. The cafe was mostly empty, the cold keeping customers indoors. Jonathan sat at a corner table under a small outdoor heater, its glow barely cutting through the chill. Lily sat beside him, her legs tucked under a heavy wool blanket, her cheeks still pink from the cold. Across from them stood the boy, Ravi, he had said, clutching his battered violin like it was the most precious thing in the world. He looked out of place among the polished windows and sleek furniture, but there was something arresting in the way he stood, like he belonged wherever his music could reach. I wasn't always in the city, Ravi began, shifting from foot to foot, not from nerves, but from the chill biting through his thin socks. I was born in a village in India. My sister, Anaya, she couldn't walk either. Polio took her legs when she was little. Jonathan watched him warily, arms folded across his chest, mind calculating. Scams were as common as snowfall in New York. But this boy wasn't asking for money. Not yet, anyway. We tried doctors, Ravi continued, but there was no money for real treatment. Then someone told us about this old woman who lived by the river. She didn't speak much. People thought she was strange. But she had this way with sound, with music. She believed that sometimes the body listens to things the brain can't hear. So I went to her. Ravi opened the case and gently lifted the violin, its wood worn but lovingly polished. He ran his fingers across the strings and closed his eyes for a breath. She taught me to play not for crowds, he said softly, but for healing. Not magic. Not tricks. Just, sound meeting soul. Trust. It's not something you explain. It's something you feel. Jonathan leaned back, lips pressed tight. He had built billion-dollar companies. He had funded research, launched startups, created algorithms that mapped human behavior. And now he was sitting across from a kid with a second-hand violin talking about soul-to-soul healing like it was a proven science. But then Ravi started to play. The first notes rose like mist over water, tentative, whispering. They stretched into the cold morning, weaving through the clatter of a passing bus, past the chatter of people on their phones. It was unlike anything Jonathan had ever heard. It wasn't polished. It wasn't refined. But it was honest. Raw and trembling and full of something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Jonathan glanced at Lily. She was watching Ravi, completely still. Then, slowly, her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Barely perceptible, but there. A flicker. Her hand moved again, this time a little stronger, as if drawn by the melody. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice hoarse, not trusting his own eyes. Ravi didn't stop playing. He only nodded, ever so slightly, and kept his eyes closed as the music swelled. Lily's eyes sparkled now. She turned her head to her father, and the look she gave him wasn't one of pleading, but quiet knowing. "Please, Dad," she seemed to say without speaking. "Please believe, just this once." Jonathan's heart wavered, caught in a storm of logic and longing. He wanted to dismiss it, to say it was coincidence, wishful thinking, some involuntary muscle spasm. But Lily's gaze held him fast. He looked at Ravi again, this boy with nothing but a violin and a story. And then back to Lily, who hadn't looked this awake, this alive, in years. Jonathan Blake, man of reason, opened his mouth to speak, and said nothing. For once, he didn't need answers. He just needed to listen. The rooftop garden was quiet, high above the blur of the city. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long amber streaks across the glass towers and distant skyline. A soft breeze danced through the air, carrying the last hint of autumn before winter would take hold. Jonathan had never used the space like this before. It was meant for clients, business meetings, maybe a rare social event. Now, it had become something else entirely, sacred, almost. Lily sat on a cushioned bench wrapped in a blanket, her eyes half-lidded in the fading light. There was something peaceful about her face, something Jonathan hadn't seen in years. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even expectant. She was simply, still. Beside her, Ravi adjusted the strings on his violin, careful, precise. His fingers moved with the memory of someone who had played this way 1,000 times, not for applause, but for connection. He didn't start with a flourish. He let the first notes fall like raindrops on dry earth, tentative but true. The sound curled into the air, mingling with the wind, the fading city sounds far below, and the golden hush of sunset. The melody was soft, minor, and aching with emotion. It felt ancient, like it carried centuries of grief and healing in each breath. As he played, Ravi began to speak, not loudly, not dramatically. Just as if he were remembering aloud. My sister used to love music, he said. Even when she couldn't walk, even when the pain was bad, she'd smile whenever I played. We didn't have much. Not enough for medicine, not enough for real help. But I thought if I could make her smile, I could make her feel like she was more than her pain. Jonathan stood nearby, arms crossed, but his eyes betrayed him. He was listening closely, his guard slowly dissolving with every note. She got worse, Ravi continued, his voice soft but steady. And I couldn't do anything. I kept playing anyway. Until the day she couldn't listen anymore. His bow didn't falter. The music changed, deeper now, richer. It was sorrow and love, grief and remembrance. It was everything he had never said to her, poured into sound. Lily, with her eyes closed, exhaled deeply. Then something shifted. Her hand, resting beneath the blanket, twitched. A second later, her foot jerked, small, but visible. Jonathan's breath caught. Lily, he whispered. Ravi didn't stop playing. The wind brushed Lily's hair as she opened her eyes, turned her face to the music. And then, slowly, with effort and focus, she placed her hand on the bench beside her. Her muscles trembled. Her legs, long still, stirred beneath the blanket. And then, to her father's amazement, she pushed herself up. One foot touched the ground. Then the other. Her knees wobbled. Jonathan moved instinctively, ready to catch her. But she held up a hand, shaking slightly, signaling him to stay back. Then, one step. Then another. Ravi's song climbed higher, lifting with her. Lily's face broke into a full, radiant smile, the kind her father hadn't seen in years. Jonathan dropped to his knees, unable to hold back the wave that overtook him. Tears streamed down his face. He looked up at Ravi, the boy who had nothing but gave everything. I have all the money in the world, Jonathan choked, voice breaking, but you gave her life. Ravi stopped playing, and silence filled the rooftop. A silence not of emptiness, but awe. And above them, the last light of the sun wrapped them in gold. The penthouse felt different that night, less like a monument of wealth and more like a home touched by something human. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. The fire crackled softly in the background, and the scent of cinnamon tea drifted from the kitchen where a kettle still steamed. Jonathan sat on the edge of the couch, a blanket around his shoulders, eyes fixed on Ravi, who now looked smaller in the soft glow of the lamp. Lily had fallen asleep upstairs, peaceful and safe, her legs curled gently under her blanket. She had taken those steps, and now she rested, like a child who had run through dreams and made them real. Ravi sat cross-legged on the rug, cradling his violin as if it were a living thing. He hadn't said much since they'd come inside. The magic of the rooftop still hung between them like morning fog refusing to lift. Jonathan, once a man who lived in the clean lines of logic, was now sitting in the aftermath of something he couldn't explain. And yet, it made more sense than anything ever had. Finally, Ravi spoke, his voice quiet. I should have told you earlier. Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Told me what? Ravi's eyes didn't meet his. Instead, they drifted to the flames in the fireplace. That I've been on the street since I was 8. After my sister died, there was nothing left. No family. No home. I made it to the city in a freight car. Found a shelter near the East River. It's not much, but it's warm sometimes. Jonathan's breath hitched, barely audible. I play to eat, Ravi continued. To stay safe. Sometimes people listen. Sometimes they don't. But yesterday, I saw you carrying your daughter. And something just, he paused, searching for the words. Something told me she needed me. Not just anyone. Me. Jonathan felt the room tilt slightly. This boy had walked into his life with nothing, no name, no credentials, no plan, just a violin and an impossible offer. And somehow, that had been enough to break through years of fear and failure. Ravi finally looked up. "I didn't lie about the music," he said. "It's real. What that woman taught me, it's all I have." The silence that followed was thick with weight. Jonathan sat back, staring at the boy, trying to wrap his mind around the injustice of it all. A child like Ravi, with a heart like his, had been thrown into a world that gave him nothing. And yet, he gave so much. Jonathan's voice was low, trembling. "You saved my daughter." Ravi shrugged. "She saved herself. I just played." "No," Jonathan stood slowly, the words catching in his throat. "You gave her something I never could. Something no doctor ever could." He walked to the boy, knelt beside him. "You don't belong on the streets, Ravi. Not anymore. You belong in a place where you can learn, grow. Where your gift can reach others." Ravi's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Jonathan said gently, "you'll live here. If you'll let me, I'll enroll you in school. Get you a mentor. And more than that." He paused, emotion swelling again. "We're going to start something together. A foundation. For kids like Lily. For healers like you. Music. Therapy. Real help. No one should be forgotten just because they don't have money." Ravi looked stunned, like the offer was too big to hold. And for the first time, Jonathan Blake, the man who had built an empire, felt like he was finally building something that truly mattered. The hall was filled with light. Tall windows let the sun pour in like liquid gold, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floors and white-draped chairs. Children filled the space, some in wheelchairs, some with braces on their legs, others leaning on canes. Parents and nurses dotted the rows, their faces a blend of joy and hope. There was laughter, the soft buzz of conversation, and beneath it all, a hum of something deeper, something sacred. On stage, a banner read, "The Blake Ravi Foundation for Healing Through Music." It fluttered gently in the breeze from the open doors. A year had passed since that cold morning on a New York street. In that time, everything had changed. Ravi stood center stage, his violin nestled under his chin. He wore a clean white shirt, a navy vest, and shoes that actually fit. But it wasn't the clothes that made people stare. It was the way he held himself, calm, proud, no longer the frail boy playing for coins. He was taller now, stronger. The tiredness had left his face, replaced by something fierce and beautiful. Beside him stood Lily, radiant in a soft yellow dress. Her hair curled around her shoulders, and her smile could have lit up the whole city. No wheelchair. No crutches. She stood tall, one hand resting lightly on Ravi's arm. When the room quieted, Lily stepped forward to speak. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and clear. "A year ago, I couldn't walk. A year ago, I didn't believe I ever would. But someone believed for me." She turned to Ravi, eyes shining. "This is my friend Ravi. He didn't have much. But what he had, he gave. And because of him, I'm standing here today." The room broke into gentle applause. Ravi blushed and gave a shy nod before raising the bow to the strings. The music began soft and slow, a melody of hope and healing, woven from all he had lived and lost and found. As the notes filled the space, something magical stirred. Children in the audience swayed to the rhythm, some clapping, others simply watching, entranced. Jonathan sat near the front, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He had watched this moment come together day by day, brick by brick, dream by dream. The foundation now served hundreds of children, offering therapy, music, and support to families that had once been forgotten. But in this moment, he wasn't the founder. He was just a father watching the miracle that had saved his daughter, and many more. His eyes never left the stage. The song climbed, lifted by sunlight and belief, and when it ended, there was silence. A full, reverent silence. Then the hall erupted in applause, not loud and wild, but warm and overflowing, like the room itself was exhaling. Lily turned to Ravi and hugged him tightly. The crowd stood. And for the first time, Ravi looked out and truly saw who he had become, not a beggar boy, not a forgotten child, but a healer, a beacon, a friend. Jonathan wiped a tear from his cheek, the kind he no longer hid. His daughter was walking. The boy who had nothing had given them everything. A soft voice spoke over the scene, part memory, part truth, part legacy. Sometimes the richest souls wear no shoes. And sometimes, a heart that has nothing, gives everything.